Ben, thank you for joining us. So earlier this week, you and your colleagues were attacked online by what can be described as an army of bots. So a basic question for you. In this context, what is a bot and what is a botnet?
Okay, so in this context, a bot is a Twitter account which appears to be run by a computer program rather than a human being. So it will post stuff without anybody being there to press the keys. It's a bit like an aeroplane flying on autopilot. It just posts stuff without human intervention. A botnet is a network of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of accounts which all do the same thing and which can be programmed to do the same thing at the same time. So what we saw on this occasion was that the botnet appeared, and this probably had about 90,000 accounts in it. So it was a large network, and it seemed to have been programmed to react to certain words. And if those words were posted in a combination, then everybody in the botnet would retweet that post. Now, because all of these accounts were only followed by other bots, it means that the retweet itself wouldn't get seen by human beings. But what would happen was the person who had made that post in the first place. So for example, I was targeted in this. As soon as I made the post, my notifications on my Twitter page were flooded by literally hundreds of new retweets every second. So effectively, I couldn't use my notifications the way I normally would. So it's a form of harassment. It's using very large networks of automated accounts to basically to spam the people that they're targeting.
Interesting. So let's back up here a little bit to get some context on why this happened. Last week, you and your fellow researchers discovered how pro-Russian bots and botnets were reacting to the protests and subsequent terrorist attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. What did you see there?
Well, what we saw to start with was the way there was a particular narrative which was used by far-right commentators and what seemed to be far-right botnets in the US, which was the narrative that American politicians were condemning the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville, but at the same time they were, and I quote, supporting the neo-Nazis in Kiev. Now, that was a strange kind of thing to be hearing from the far right in the United States, but it's something we've been hearing ever since March 2014 from the Kremlin and from the Kremlin propaganda machine. So what we started looking at was the way this narrative of Ukrainian Nazis and American Nazis had spread from the Kremlin into far-right commentators in the United States. As part of that, we identified a few fake accounts, a few bots which were amplifying the message. Our report was then picked up by an American news outlet called ProPublica, and they pulled together our report and a separate report by a group called Hamilton 68, which looked more at the bot angle. So Hamilton 68 did a lot more work on pro-Russian amplifiers, including bots. ProPublica combined our research and the Hamilton 68 research and did a big article on the pro-Russian bots which were amplifying the Charlottesville neo-Nazi messaging. And then ProPublica on Twitter got attacked by a big botnet. And so because they'd been quoting our research, they contacted us and asked us to look at what we could identify about the botnet. And we looked at it and we realized that the botnet was the same one which had been used at the end of at the end of July this year to target a journalist called Julia Davis who had been tweeting about the Russian shelling of Ukraine. And so we recognized that this was a botnet which in the past had been used to attack somebody who was tweeting about Russia.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the purpose of these bots was, in your opinion, and how, I mean, the greater purpose, and how effective were they at achieving that goal?
It looks like the purpose was intimidation, because if you're the person who holds the Twitter account which they are targeting, suddenly what you see is your own notifications go mad. And literally, that I would be getting an update every minute that 200 more accounts had retweeted me, for example. The first time that happens to you, it's quite startling. It can be quite alarming. And it also makes it quite difficult for you to work just because the notifications are coming in so fast. So it looks like it was a combination of intimidation. It's the people who run the botnet saying, "Look how many of us they are. Look how powerful we are," which is something you often hear from people who run this kind of network. And it was also harassment. It was making it harder for us to do our jobs. Now, it wasn't actually particularly effective because we managed to work out exactly what words were triggering these botnets to start striking people, because they started off targeting ProPublica, then they moved on to us. We wrote another post on that, and then people who wrote about our post and people who tweeted about our post started getting some of the same treatment. Not on the same scale, but they got it. And so looking at all different tweets which attacked, we worked out what the keywords were, and we worked out that if you tweeted a certain combination of words, that would trigger this botnet, and the botnet would start retweeting you. So what we then did was write another tweet with those keywords, but including the address of the Twitter support team. And the botnet started retweeting that tweet. And so effectively, every single bot account which retweeted that tweet was also identifying itself to the Twitter support network. So the result has been that yesterday evening, that tweet that we posted had 86,000 retweets. By this morning, it was down to 35,000 because more than 50,000 bots had been identified and taken off air. So actually, the result has been that by using the botnet in this way, the people who run the botnet have lost quite a lot of their bots.
So that's very effective. Let's just take a look quickly at the attack on you and the Atlantic Council earlier this week. There were some very colorful, I would say, events in the course of that attack. Could you describe a few of them for us?
Okay, so the main events were about halfway through this cycle of intimidation. Somebody, and we don't know who the user was, but somebody created a couple of fake Twitter accounts. One of them stole my image from my Twitter account, but it wasn't trying to impersonate me. It was just trying to mock me. It was claiming that I'm paid by the FSB and that I work for the Kremlin, and it was silly, and that was simply somebody playing a game. But then they also created an account which was an exact mirror of my boss, and they got that account to tweet the news that I was dead. And that was quite a lot darker, and something which clearly they'd taken more time over. Now, because it was an impersonation account, it didn't last very long. It was very obviously an account which was trying to fool people. It was trying to pretend to be my boss. So that was a darker tone to it. But again, that tweet didn't last very long. It was deleted within, or the account was taken down within a couple of hours. So it was a short-term impact.
That's definitely a dark turn. Of course, you and the Atlantic Council, you're not the only ones writing about disinformation online, or necessarily the only ones writing about bots. Do you have any idea why maybe you and your organization specifically were targeted? Do you think it had to do with some of your past work even further back than the Charlottesville bot attacks?
It looks like it was a response to what ProPublica had written about Charlottesville, and then the first article we did exposing this botnet. And I suspect, I mean, you can only ever make an informed deduction on this one, but I suspect that what had happened was, because we recognized that the botnet which was targeting ProPublica was the same botnet which had targeted the journalist Julia Davis before, we exposed both the way they were working, and we exposed something about why they were working. Because if you think about the ProPublica article, it was about pro-Russian bots and the far right in the United States. So effectively, there are two different groups of people who might have an interest in attacking that story. But the tweet that Julia Davis had posted back in July, which was attacked back in July, was about Russia shelling Ukraine. Now, there's no reason that the far right in the US would be interested in attacking that, but there very clearly is a reason why pro-Russian accounts would be interested in attacking it. So putting those two incidents together, we were able to say that this is a single botnet operating, and we went through all the identifiers of how we could tell this was a single botnet. and the likelihood is that it is run by pro-Russian people. And so putting that together, that identifies the botnet, it exposes it, and it therefore lays it open to the likelihood that it will be shut down at some point. So in that sense, it threatens what the people who manage the botnet are doing, and therefore they will try and strike back. Now, the way they did it was, in fact, to give us loads more data on their botnet and probably get quite a lot more of their accounts shut down.
Very interesting. So you've described how this was actually in some ways not effective for them because it allowed you to learn more about them and get them shut down. Are there any other takeaways from this bot attack? Anything that you or we could learn from it?
Yeah, and it was an interesting one because it exposed the scale of some of these botnets, and it looks like there were a number of nets of slightly different styles working together. So one group of accounts which had hundreds, if not thousands, of members, you could see the accounts had been quite carefully made. So they each had a plausible kind of name. They each had a photo attached to them. Somebody had spent some time on this. But the telltale was that you probably had a couple of thousand accounts, but they only had maybe 100 photos. So you had lots of different accounts sharing the same photo, which is a giveaway. And then there was a separate, much larger network, which had over 100,000 members, where almost none of the accounts had any kind of, they didn't have an avatar picture. There was very little in the way of personal attention. It didn't look like anybody had put any effort into creating this network. So it looked like there were two different networks going on, but they were working together. And so if you add them up, you're probably talking over 125,000 accounts. So it shows us the size of this network. It shows the level of aggression which is out there. But it also shows that there are actually quite a lot of ways that you can identify a botnet without using specialized equipment. For example, looking at the smaller of the two nets we identified, all of these accounts were liking or retweeting the same content. So if you just go down the list of accounts which have liked them, you see the same profile picture coming up time and again and again and again and again, but with different account names and different account handles. You don't need to be any kind of programmer to know that that's fake. So actually, it's been a very useful lesson in all the different ways that you can identify a fake account. Another example would be that looking at some of these accounts which are acting, each one of them was posting retweets in English, Russian, Arabic, Malaysian, Indonesian, French, Spanish, and Turkish. Now, there's no credible way that that's a human being doing that. So again, all you need to do is look at that account and just go down the list. And within a minute, you can be absolutely confident that that's a fake account. So what it's done is shown us how many different methods there are of identifying bots and identifying fake accounts.
So essentially, any Twitter user can, knowing this information, look and see that these are bots.
That's right. I mean, not all bots are the same style. Some are better designed than others. But certainly the simpler ones, any Twitter user can have a look, and if they know the tricks, they can identify a bot. I mean, for example, for me, the three classic indicators are activity, anonymity, and amplification. I think of them as the three A's. And all you need to do, for example, for the activity, you look at the date when the account was created, and you look at the number of tweets it's posted. And so you can work out from those two numbers how many times a day is it posting. And there are bot accounts out there which I know which are posting 800 or 1,000 times a day. That's just not a human behavior pattern. So all you need to do is compare those two numbers, and some of the bots you will spot. You can look at the anonymity. You can look at if they've got any kind of identifying features. If they haven't, you might well be looking at a fake account. And then you look at the way they amplify messaging. You can look at how many of their posts are retweets. And again, there are bots out there which I know that post 1,000 times a day, and all those posts are retweets. And so if an account is posting that often, it doesn't give any personal information, and all it's doing is retweeting other accounts, then it's obviously a bot which has been created to retweet people.
Well, Ben, thank you very much for joining us today.